The endocrine system is made up of several endocrine glands. The endocrine gland cells, that are usually cuboidal epithelial cells, secrete a hormone. So these gland cells release a hormone, which is a chemical that could be either a steroid or a non-steroid molecule. Once the hormone is released, it goes right into the bloodstream. So the hormone enters the bloodstream. The hormone travels in the bloodstream until it arrives at the target cell. A target cell is any cell in the body that carries a receptor for this particular hormone. So the hormone arrives at the target cell. Once it arrives at the target cell, the hormone looks for a receptor in the target cell. So it binds to the receptor in the target cell. This receptor could either be outside the target cell, on the surface of the target cell, or it could be inside the target cell. Once it binds to the target cell responds to the hormone. Depending upon how they travel through the bloodstream and their action on the target cell, hormones are divided into two types: steroid hormones and non-steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are hydrophobic. Non-steroid hormones are hydrophilic. So based on that, let's see how they travel and how they impact the target cell. This is the bloodstream, the blood vessel. The steroid hormones are shown in blue. The steroid hormones do not mix with water, so they need a transport protein, shown here in green, to carry them to the target cell. So steroid hormones cannot travel by themselves as free hormones. They must be accompanied by a transport protein. Once they arrive at the target cell, the transport protein releases the steroid hormone. Remember that the cell membrane has a phospholipid bilayer which is hydrophobic. Steroid molecules are hydrophobic too, so they can enter the target cell quite easily. And once they enter the target cell, they find their receptor, shown in white, and that acts on the target cell. And the target cell responds. So this is fairly simple. The non-steroid hormones, they travel fairly easily through the bloodstream because they do mix with water. They don't need a transport protein to carry them. So the non-steroid hormones travel as free hormones in the bloodstream. However, once they arrive at the target cell, they have a problem. Non-steroid hormones are hydrophilic, and the phospholipid bilayer, the interior of it, is hydrophobic, so they cannot enter the target cell. Non-steroid hormones do not enter the target cell. Instead, they find a receptor on the surface of the target cell and bind to it. The receptor is shown in yellow. This receptor then turns on a G protein molecule, shown in pink, turns it on, which in turn activates an enzyme, shown in green, on the cell membrane. This enzyme then activates another molecule, which we now call the second messenger or the secondary messenger. This yellow molecule that we see here finally acts on the DNA of the target cell, and the target cell responds. This is quite complex, and therefore we call the hormone a primary messenger because it's bringing the primary message from the endocrine gland. But it does not directly act on the target cell's DNA. We need a secondary messenger to do that. And that secondary messenger is shown here in yellow. Let's take a look at how the non-steroid hormone impacts its target cell. Here we're dealing with a receptor that is coupled with a special protein called the G protein. The hormone is shown in blue. It binds to its receptor. The receptor then activates the G protein. The activated G protein then binds to an enzyme that is also located on the membrane of the target cell. The activated enzyme now is able to activate ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and convert it to cyclic AMP, which is adenosine monophosphate. Cyclic AMP is a very important molecule which acts directly on the DNA of the target cell. The target cell can now respond. So here we have it. The hormone is the primary messenger because it's carrying the message from the endocrine gland. It cannot enter the cell, so it makes use of a secondary messenger, which is cyclic AMP. The endocrine system maintains homeostasis via the action of the hormones. As we all know, the hypothalamus is the control center for homeostasis. So let's begin there. Here we have the hypothalamus in the brain. Right below it is the pituitary gland that produces lots of hormones. We also have the pineal gland in the brain. It produces just one hormone, melatonin. In the throat area, we have the thyroid and the parathyroid glands, which are extremely important in maintaining metabolism and calcium levels. Next comes the thymus. This is important for the immune system to function properly. In the digestive system region, we have pancreas. Pancreas maintain blood glucose levels. Just above the kidneys are the adrenal glands. These are very important glands producing many important hormones. If we're dealing with a female, then we have the ovary, which produces estrogen and progesterone. And during pregnancy, the uterus, the placenta attached to the uterus, also produces a number of hormones. In males, the testes produce testosterone. The pituitary gland has two parts, anterior and posterior. The anterior pituitary gland produces growth hormone. The growth hormone, as its name indicates, brings about growth during puberty and beyond. The next hormone is prolactin. It acts on the mammary glands and helps in milk production in females. The third hormone is follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. Its function is to help females produce eggs and males to produce sperm. So it acts on both ovaries and testes. The next hormone is luteinizing hormone. In females, it brings on ovulation. LH. Luteinizing hormone is called LH. The next hormone is the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. As its name indicates, it stimulates the thyroid gland to produce its hormones. Similarly, the ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce its hormones. Tropic means to stimulate. Here is the ICSH, or interstitial cell stimulating hormone. It acts on the testes, specific cells on the testes, stimulate them and make them produce testosterone. Now for the target organs. The growth hormone pretty much acts on every cell in the body. However, it has a special effect on muscles, bones, and the liver during the growth spurt. Prolactin acts on mammary glands. Follicle stimulating hormone, because it is important for egg production and sperm production. In females, it acts on the ovaries, and in the males, it acts on the testes. LH also acts on the ovaries. The TSH acts on the thyroid gland, and the adrenal corticotropic hormone acts on the adrenal cortex. There's the adrenal gland, and the outer part of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal cortex. The ICSH acts on the testes. As its name indicates, the growth hormone brings on growth. Prolactin helps in milk production. Follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, is important for oogenesis in females and spermatogenesis in males. Luteinizing hormone brings on ovulation in females. The TSH stimulates the thyroid gland. ACTH stimulates the adrenal cortex, and the ICSH stimulates the testes. Problems associated with the pituitary gland usually involve the growth hormone. If a person produces way too much growth hormone, the result is giantism. The person grows extremely tall with a very large skull and very large hands and feet. This condition is called acromegaly, with large head, hands and feet which don't stop growing and produce growing pains way beyond the onset of adulthood. If the growth hormone production is too low during the growing period, the result is dwarfism. Now for the posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary produces two hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. The antidiuretic hormone, as its name indicates, inhibits urination. When you take a diuretic, you want to urinate, but the antidiuretic hormone is the opposite. It's ADH for short. Oxytocin acts on the mammary glands and the uterus. It helps both in breastfeeding and childbirth. Now for the target organs. The ADH not only acts on the kidneys, but it also acts on blood vessels, so it has two target organs. The oxytocin also has two target organs, mammary glands, where it helps to release milk during breastfeeding, and uterus, where it helps in providing strong uterine contractions so that childbirth may progress. So here are the functions. The ADH helps in water retention, and it brings on vasoconstriction in the blood vessels, which helps to raise blood pressure when it's needed. In the oxytocin side, we have two functions. The mammary glands help in releasing milk during breastfeeding, and in the uterus, oxytocin brings on strong uterine contractions that will help the process of childbirth. Let's move down to the throat area, where we have the thyroid gland and the parathyroid glands. The thyroid gland helps to raise metabolic rate and lower blood calcium levels. So it produces two hormones that do this. The thyroxine, which raises the metabolic rate of the body, and calcitonin, which tones down the level of calcium in blood. The parathyroid glands produce parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone works opposite to calcitonin. It raises blood calcium levels. Now for the target organs. Thyroxine acts on most organs in the body, and it raises our metabolic rate. Calcitonin acts on bones, and its job is to lower blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone acts both on the bones and the kidneys, and it raises the blood calcium levels. Notice how calcitonin and PTH work opposite to each other. They work antagonistically to each other. Problems associated with the thyroid gland have to do with the levels of thyroxine. If the thyroid gland is underactive, then the level of thyroxine is low. We call this condition hypothyroidism. When the thyroid gland is overactive, the condition that results is called hyperthyroidism, with the levels of thyroxine being too high. There is a third condition that has to do with the levels of iodine in the diet. Iodine is important to make thyroxine, so when there is no iodine in the diet, it results in a condition called endemic goiter. With hypothyroidism, the levels of thyroxine are low. Normally, thyroxine helps to raise metabolic rate, so when levels of thyroxine are low, it results in a low metabolic rate, slow mental processing, and unexplained and excessive weight gain. With hyperthyroidism, the levels of thyroxine are too high, and the overactive thyroid gland results in a very high level of metabolism. The patient also presents with a condition called exophthalmia, which means there is an abnormal protrusion of the eyeballs. Iodine is necessary to make thyroxine. So when the levels of iodine in the diet go down, the level of thyroxine production goes down as well, and the level of thyroxine in blood decreases. This is sensed by the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, and as a result, TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone increases, and this causes the thyroid gland cells to multiply and grow in size. And that's the condition that we call endemic goiter, which is a very huge enlargement of the thyroid gland. Now for the pancreas. The pancreas releases insulin and glucagon. Insulin is a hormone that lowers blood glucose levels, and glucagon is a hormone that raises blood glucose levels. Imagine that you have just eaten a meal. After a while, your blood glucose levels will go up. To counter this, the pancreas will release insulin. Insulin helps to take the excess blood glucose and put it into the body cells where they can be used as fuel. It will also put some of that glucose into the liver so that the excess glucose can be converted to glycogen, which is a polysaccharide, and stored for future use. Now imagine that you haven't eaten for a few hours. Your blood glucose levels start to go down. In order to counter this, the pancreas releases glucagon. What glucagon does is that it acts on the liver and helps to convert glycogen back to glucose so that it can be released into the blood. So to recap, insulin lowers blood glucose levels, whereas glucagon raises blood glucose levels. Let's look at some problems associated with the pancreas. We have hyperglycemia. Hyper means too much, glycose meaning sugar, and emia means blood condition. Or we have hypoglycemia. Hypo means too little, glycose means sugar, emia means blood condition. So in hyperglycemia, the blood sugar levels are too high. In hypoglycemia, the blood sugar levels are too low. This can be caused due to the levels of insulin. If the insulin levels are too low, then we end up with hypoglycemia. If the insulin levels are too high, then we end up with hypoglycemia. The lack of insulin leading to diabetes is also known as type 1 diabetes, not to be confused with type 2 diabetes, which is caused due to overconsumption of sugar. The adrenal glands are placed right above the kidney, one on each kidney. The adrenal gland has two parts. The outer layer of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal cortex. The inner part or the middle portion of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal medulla. Each of these parts are quite distinct and they each produce their own hormones with their own functions. So let's take a look at each one of them. The adrenal cortex produces three hormones: cortisol, aldosterone, and adrenal androgens. The adrenal medulla produces adrenaline and noradrenaline. They are also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine. They mean the same thing. Now for the target organs. The cortisol acts on all cells in the body. Aldosterone acts on the kidneys. Adrenal androgens act on most organs of the body. Adrenaline and noradrenaline also act on most parts of the body. Now for their functions. Cortisol prepares the body for long-term stress. It raises the blood glucose levels, it lowers inflammation, and also depresses the immune system. Aldosterone, its function is to maintain sodium-potassium balance. It helps the body to retain sodium and get rid of potassium. Adrenal androgens, they emphasize the male characteristics of a person, both in males and in females. They increase libido and body hair. The adrenaline and noradrenaline prepare the body for immediate stress by raising the heart rate and the respiratory rate. Problems associated with the adrenal cortex have something to do with the levels of cortisol. If the levels of cortisol are too high, it results in a condition called Cushing syndrome. The high level of cortisol results in high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and weight gain, especially in the face. If the levels of cortisol are too low, it results in a condition called Addison's disease. The low level of cortisol results in extreme fatigue, low blood pressure, and fainting. So here we have it again. For Cushing syndrome, there is weight gain, especially in the face, and very high blood pressure. And with Addison's disease, there's extreme fatigue and very low blood pressure. Let's take a look at a couple of smaller endocrine glands: pineal gland that produces melatonin and thymus gland that produces thymosin. The target organ for melatonin is the brain, and the target cells for thymosin are the T cells. Melatonin maintains our daily rhythms, which are also known as circadian rhythms. Melatonin also helps to promote sleep. Thymosin helps in the maturation of T lymphocytes that provide us with long-term immunity. Now let's take a look at two more endocrine glands, ovaries and testes. Ovaries in females produce two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Testes in males produce testosterone. All these three hormones are steroid hormones. The target organs for estrogen is most organs in the body. For progesterone, the target organ is the uterus. For testosterone, the target organ is most organs in the body. Estrogen maintains the female characteristics such as mammary glands, uterus, fallopian tube, etc. The estrogen also helps to maintain the female menstrual cycle. Progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. It maintains pregnancy. Testosterone maintains male characteristics, and it also promotes libido. The endocrine system plays a very important role in maintaining homeostasis. It does this by negative feedback. So let's take a look at the negative feedback loop between hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the thyroid gland. The hypothalamus releases a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone, which activates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine. Thyroxine raises the body's metabolism, and at the same time, when thyroxine levels are high, it blocks the action of hypothalamus and pituitary gland so that no more thyroid stimulating hormone will be released. And in this way, it maintains homeostasis so that you don't get too much thyroxine and increase the body's metabolic rate to a point that might be harmful. The endocrine system plays an important role in bringing about rapid change. A good example is what happens during childbirth. During childbirth, the fetus's head presses against the cervix of the mother. This causes the receptors in the cervix to send messages to the brain. In the brain, the pituitary gland is turned on and it releases a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is released into the blood, reaches the uterus, and causes strong contractions. So when the uterus contracts really strong, it squeezes against the fetus and makes the fetus head press even more against the cervix. As a result, this pathway is repeated many times in a positive feedback loop. This continues until the baby is born. And the purpose of a positive feedback loop is to bring about rapid action.